Coming to America turned a royal fairy tale into one of the most quoted comedies ever made. From a secret disguise to a cast full of future legends, this movie hides more surprises than most fans ever realized. We're counting down 20 facts that will completely change how you watch Prince Akeem's journey to Queens. And stick around for a jaw-dropping bonus connection almost nobody ever notices, hiding in plain sight inside a single park scene. So speed up with me, because the list starts now. Number 1. The movie almost had a completely different name. Before Prince Akeem ever set foot in Queens, this film almost went out under a title that sounds like a medieval fantasy epic. Eddie Murphy originally pitched his story to Paramount under the name The Quest. It followed a sheltered African prince who leaves his palace for the first time to find real love instead of an arranged bride. Paramount didn't think the title carried any commercial punch, so executives pushed hard for something catchier and more marketable. Studio marketing teams in the late 1980s wanted titles that told audiences exactly what genre they were buying a ticket for, and The Quest sounded far more like a sword-and-sorcery adventure than a culture clash comedy. Executives worried moviegoers would skip a film they assumed was straight fantasy rather than laugh-out-loud satire. The rename to Coming to America solved that instantly, promising fish-out-of-water comedy right from the poster art. It's a small decision that ended up shaping the entire identity of the film before a single frame was shot. One word swap turned a vague fantasy pitch into a title people still quote decades later. Number 2. Eddie Murphy refused to play a character with his own name. When Murphy first read the early drafts of the script, one detail stopped him cold. The African prince at the center of the story was literally named Eddie, and Murphy hated the idea immediately. By 1988, he was already one of the biggest comedy stars on the planet, and he didn't want audiences watching a version of himself in royal robes. He wanted to disappear completely into an original character, someone nobody would automatically connect to his stand-up specials or his fast-talking earlier roles. So he pushed for a full rewrite, and the result was Prince Akeem of Zamunda, a polite, soft-spoken royal who is the total opposite of Murphy's usual on-screen energy. That single request reshaped how the whole film would feel, giving Murphy room to show off a completely different register as an actor. Losing his own name on the page is exactly what let audiences believe in Akeem's innocence from his very first scene. If you are enjoying this, take 2 seconds and leave a like. Subscribe if you want more videos like this. That support really motivates my work and helps a lot with bringing more content. Number 3. The studio insisted on adding a white actor to the cast. Murphy originally envisioned Coming to America with a fully black principal cast, but Paramount wasn't comfortable green-lighting that plan as written. Studio executives insisted on including at least one white actor to help balance the ensemble, a request rooted in outdated assumptions about which movies could sell tickets nationwide. In 1988, plenty of Hollywood decision-makers still doubted that a film led almost entirely by black actors could cross over to mainstream audiences, despite years of evidence to the contrary. Murphy wasn't thrilled about the interference, but he handled it with characteristic style, hand-picking comedian Louie Anderson and calling him the funniest white guy he knew. Anderson ended up playing Morris, the cheerfully oblivious McDowell's employee who dreams of getting promoted from the lettuce station to the fryer. Ironically, Morris became such a fan favorite that he's the only supporting character from the original film to return decades later in the sequel. What began as a forced studio note turned into one of the most beloved side characters in the whole franchise. Number 4. Arsenio Hall left an animated show to take this role. Before he became Semi, Prince Akeem's dramatic and endlessly whiny best friend, Arsenio Hall was busy voicing a completely different icon. He was providing the voice of Winston Zeddemore on the animated Ghostbusters spin-off series, a steady gig with real job security in television. When the Coming to America script landed on his desk, Hall didn't hesitate for a second and walked away from the cartoon entirely. It was a genuine gamble, trading a comfortable voiceover job for an unproven feature film role, but it paid off in a massive way. Hall didn't just play Semi in the movie, he transformed into several other characters as well, including a fast-talking preacher, a wild barbershop regular, and an unforgettable, unsettling woman at the nightclub. His on-screen chemistry with Murphy crackled in nearly every scene they shared together, and his range instantly proved he belonged on the big screen. Walking away from a cartoon paycheck turned Arsenio Hall into a certified member of comedy royalty. Number 5. The fake fast food restaurant nearly got the film sued. McDowell's was never meant to be subtle. The production deliberately built a McDonald's knockoff with golden arcs instead of golden arches, a Big Mick standing in for the Big Mac, and uniforms that looked almost identical to the real thing. That level of detail was the entire joke, but it also caught the attention of actual McDonald's lawyers. The real corporation sent representatives to the filming location to investigate potential trademark violations, worried the parody crossed a legal line rather than staying inside protected satire. In response, the production team built an entire fake employee manual explaining in exhaustive detail exactly how McDowell's differed from McDonald's, right down to the number of sesame seeds and beef patties on each order. Somehow that absurd paper trail worked, and the legal threat faded without ever reaching a courtroom. Today, McDowell's is such a beloved cultural icon in its own right that fans have staged real pop-up versions of the restaurant just to relive the joke in person. A parody built to mock a fast food giant nearly ended up in court instead of movie history. Number 6. A future Marvel legend robbed the fake fast food restaurant. Years before he was barking orders at snakes on a plane or commanding an eye patch in the Marvel universe, this actor showed up in Coming to America for barely a minute of screen time. Samuel L. Jackson plays the shotgun-wielding robber who bursts into McDowell's, orders everyone to the floor, and demands the register be emptied on the spot. The scene lasts only a few seconds, but Jackson's raw intensity is impossible to miss even in that brief window. At the time, he was still mostly known within theater circles rather than as a movie star, and this was one of his very first credited film appearances. Even with just a handful of lines, he manages to dominate the frame completely, hinting at the commanding screen presence that would define his career for decades afterward. It's genuinely wild to think the man robbing a fictional burger joint would eventually become one of the most bankable actors in Hollywood history. A single explosive scene turned out to be the first glimpse of a soon-to-be legend. Number 7. The barber's most iconic look was inspired by a real person. Saul, the elderly Jewish barber played by Eddie Murphy under layers of prosthetics, stands out as one of the most convincing character transformations in the entire film. Credit for that belongs to legendary makeup artist Rick Baker, who didn't just invent Saul's look from scratch. Baker based the character's face, voice, and mannerisms directly on his own father-in-law, giving the performance a level of specificity that pure imagination rarely achieves. Some of the close-up shots of Saul's weathered hands aren't even Murphy's. They belong to Baker's father-in-law, who filmed as a hand double for those particular angles. The illusion worked so well that many audiences genuinely believed a different actor entirely was under the makeup. Baker later said building Saul was one of the most rewarding and technically demanding transformations of his entire career. Family inspiration, translated through makeup artistry, is what made Saul feel like a real person rather than a costume. Number 8. A future Oscar winner's first film role had no lines at all. Long before he shouted his most famous catchphrase or won an Academy Award, Cuba Gooding Jr. made his film debut sitting silently in a barbershop chair. In Coming to America, he appears during the famous barbershop scene, getting a trim from Eddie Murphy's elderly barber character without a single word of dialogue. He doesn't react, doesn't get a close-up, and barely moves for the entire shot. Yet that blink and you'll miss it appearance marked the start of a massive career. At the time, Gooding was just beginning to break into the industry, and simply landing a background spot in a major Eddie Murphy film was already a significant opportunity for a newcomer. Fans who rewatch the barbershop scene now love pointing him out, knowing that quiet teenager in the chair would go on to become one of the biggest names in 1990s cinema. It's proof that even the smallest possible role can end up as a launching pad. Not bad at all for a role that required nothing more than sitting still for a haircut. Before we keep going, subscribe if you haven't yet. Drop a comment telling me which movie or show you want me to cover next with strange behind-the-scenes facts. I read every single one. Number 9, a legendary improvised moment may have invented the mic drop. That unforgettable scene where singer Randy Watson butchers the greatest love of all, and then drops his microphone like he just headlined Madison Square Garden, was never written into the script. Eddie Murphy and Arsenio Hall came up with the bit together, completely on the spot, while the cameras were already rolling. At the time, the concept of a literal mic drop wasn't yet a cultural shorthand for nothing left to say, which makes its appearance here feel almost accidental in the best possible way. Murphy has claimed over the years that this scene might be one of the earliest mic drops ever captured on film, and while that's difficult to verify with total certainty, it clearly helped push the gesture into the mainstream. Decades later, the mic drop became a staple of stand-up specials, rap battles, and viral internet clips everywhere. All of that traces back to one improvised moment involving a terrible wig and an even worse cover band. Randy Watson and Sexual Chocolate accidentally gave pop culture one of its most enduring physical punchlines. Number 10. The sequel brought back costumes from 30 years earlier. When coming second, America went into production decades after the original. The costume department didn't start entirely from scratch. Instead, they dug deep into studio archives and pulled out several of the original royal outfits worn by Eddie Murphy, Arsenio Hall, and James Earl Jones back in 1988. Costume designer Ruth E. Carter carefully restored and updated select pieces while preserving the essence and craftsmanship of the originals, keeping the embroidery, gold accents, and custom prints just as striking as they were the first time around. That decision wasn't only about saving budget, it was a deliberate tribute to the legacy of the first film and a way of physically connecting both movies through shared material history. 3 decades later, the same robes and crowns still fit the tone of Zamunda perfectly, proving that thoughtful costume design rarely goes out of style. It's a small behind-the-scenes detail that longtime fans especially appreciate once they know to look for it. Reusing 3-decade-old fabric turned out to be one of the sequel's quietest and most meaningful choices. Number 11. Rick Baker built dozens of custom sets of teeth for the cast. Bringing Coming to America's wildest characters to life required far more than wigs and prosthetics. Legendary makeup artist Rick Baker went as far as crafting more than 40 individual sets of custom teeth, each one designed to match a specific personality among Murphy and Hall's many alter egos. Every pair carried its own backstory built into the design, from Randy Watson's crooked, overconfident grin to Saul the Barber's worn-down, aged dentures. Baker varied the shading, shape, and gum lines on each set so that every character looked genuinely lived in, rather than like an actor wearing an obvious costume piece. That level of obsessive detail helped the actors transform completely, altering not just how they looked, but how they spoke and physically carried themselves in every scene. It's the kind of craftsmanship most viewers never consciously notice, yet it's exactly why so many of these characters still feel distinct on rewatch. Total character immersion, it turns out, sometimes comes down to the smallest details, right down to the molars. Number 12. One of the most quoted lines in the movie wasn't even scripted. During the barbershop scene, Jura Rashatsi, Murphy's elderly barber character, launches into a rambling argument about Muhammad Ali's name change from Cassius Clay, insisting his own mother named him Clay too, and he's not changing it for anybody. That entire exchange was never written into the original script at all. Murphy slipped fully into character and improvised the bit live on set, letting the rhythm of the argument build naturally instead of following any planned dialogue. It landed so hard that the crew reportedly burst out laughing behind the camera, and the take was simply kept in the final cut because nothing scripted could have topped it. The bit became such an iconic piece of the film's identity that it was recreated almost word for word decades later in the sequel, treated as sacred material rather than something to rewrite. One unscripted tangent about boxing turned into one of the most quoted stretches of dialogue in the entire movie. It's a perfect example of how the best comedy sometimes comes from throwing the script away entirely. Number 13. A crew snuck a shot inside a luxury hotel without full permission. When Prince Akeem and Semi first arrive in New York, and check into the luxurious Waldorf Astoria. The moment looks completely polished and effortless on screen. Behind the scenes, though, the production reportedly didn't have full clearance to film inside that particular location. Rather than scrap the shot, the crew moved fast and quiet, arriving with a minimal setup, grabbing the footage as efficiently as possible, and clearing out before anyone could formally intervene. It was a genuine risk at such a tightly controlled, high-profile address. But the payoff was worth it, because the footage ended up being too good to leave on the cutting room floor. That quick, almost stolen shot gave Akeem's entrance into America a sense of real-world grandeur that a built studio set simply couldn't replicate. In a film full of elaborate costumes and constructed sets, this one fleeting moment of guerrilla filmmaking added a layer of authenticity money couldn't easily buy. Sometimes royalty arrives with fanfare, and sometimes the crew filming it has to move just as quietly to pull off the shot. Quick reminder to subscribe if you are enjoying these revelations. And tell me in the comments, do you know any strange fact about this movie that I didn't mention? Let's build the list together. Number 14, one of the wildest characters on screen genuinely scared the actor's own mother. Among all of Arsenio Hall's transformations in the film, one of the most memorable isn't a preacher or a barbershop regular at all. During the nightclub montage, Hall appears in full drag as an aggressively flirty woman, relentlessly on the hunt for a date. The transformation was convincing enough that, according to Hall, even his own mother didn't immediately recognize her son underneath all that makeup and hair when she first watched the scene. Once she realized who it actually was, Hall later joked that she seemed more disturbed by that particular character than by almost anything else he's ever performed. It wasn't simply a quick sight gag either. The commitment to the bit pushed the performance into genuinely uncanny territory rather than an obvious winking parody. In a film already stacked with strange, larger-than-life personalities, this one somehow manages to stand out as both hilarious and a little unsettling at once. Few costume changes in comedy history have unsettled an actor's own family quite this thoroughly. Number 15, The Soul Glow. Jingle was written by a genuine music legend. That gloriously cheesy falsetto anthem urging everyone to let your soul glow was never a throwaway parody song tossed together on a whim. It was actually written by Nile Rodgers, the celebrated musician behind disco classics for artists across an entire era of dance music. Rodgers was specifically brought in to capture the exact tone of an over-the-top 1980s hair care commercial. And by most accounts, he nailed the assignment on the first attempt. The vocals, delivered with theatrical intensity, were intentionally dramatic and overproduced, which is precisely what made the fake product feel weirdly, hilariously real to audiences watching it. Some viewers reportedly believed Soul Glow was an actual hair care brand you could buy in stores, thanks to the dripping activator juice and the slow-motion glamour shots, treated with total sincerity. Rodgers has said the jingle remains one of the most purely fun projects he's ever contributed to across his entire career. A few seconds of screen time became one of the most quotable musical moments in comedy film history. Number 16. The director and Eddie Murphy didn't enjoy working together this time around. Murphy specifically brought director John Landis back for Coming to America, hoping to recapture the creative chemistry they'd shared while making Trading Places together several years earlier. This time, though, things played out very differently on set. Back on Trading Places, Murphy had been the relatively new performer, still establishing himself in feature films. By the time Coming to America went into production, he was one of the biggest movie stars on the planet, and the power dynamic between director and star had completely flipped in the meantime. Landis reportedly treated Murphy with the same directorial approach he'd used years earlier, an approach that no longer matched Murphy's now elevated status, and tension between the two built quickly throughout the shoot. Murphy later admitted in interviews that working with Landis on this particular film ranked among the least enjoyable experiences of his career, even though the final product became a beloved classic. The two did eventually reunite for Beverly Hills Cop 3 years later, but by most accounts, the original spark and trust between them was never fully restored. A tense set can still produce a beloved film, even when the people behind the camera aren't getting along. Number 17. The fictional fast food chain briefly became a real restaurant. For years, fans joked about wanting to walk into a real McDowell's and order an actual Big Mick, fully embracing Eddie Murphy's fictional fast food parody as something more than a movie prop. In 2017, that fantasy briefly became reality. A Chicago restaurant called the Wiener's Circle teamed up with a marketing agency to transform its space into an authentic-feeling McDowell's pop-up for a single Halloween weekend. And the team committed fully to the bit, rather than simply slapping a logo on the door. Staff wore McDowell's-style uniforms, the walls were decorated with framed photos referencing the Zamundan royal family, and the menu featured Big Mick burgers alongside novelty, sexual chocolate milkshakes. The event drew lines wrapping around the block, proved popular enough that it returned again the following year, and reportedly even earned a laugh and a stamp of approval from Eddie Murphy himself once he heard about it. It's rare for a fictional restaurant dreamed up for a movie joke to briefly become an actual cultural destination people wait in line for. For one memorable weekend, fans genuinely got to taste a small piece of Zamunda in the middle of Chicago. Almost at the end, and the best is still coming, subscribe so you don't miss what's next, and drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this video is reaching. Number 18. An actor reportedly got the role by making a joking threat over the phone. When John Amos heard about the role of Cleo McDowell, the proud, burger-obsessed father convinced his restaurant is nothing like McDonald's. He skipped auditioning entirely. He didn't send in a tape or sit through a formal casting session. Instead, he reportedly just placed a call directly to the production. What he said next has become something of a legend on its own. He jokingly warned that if they tried to keep him out of this movie, there would be serious consequences. It clearly wasn't meant literally, but the confidence behind it apparently convinced producers on the spot that they'd found their man for the role. Amos brought a perfect blend of gruffness and genuine warmth to Cleo, playing a father who's noticeably more impressed by wealth and business success than by any hint of actual royal lineage. His delivery, especially while proudly insisting McDowell's is nothing at all like its obvious real-world inspiration, became one of the most quietly iconic performances in the entire film. Sometimes all it takes to land a role is one extremely bold, extremely confident phone call. Number 19. The film was formally preserved as part of America's cultural history. In 2021, Coming to America received one of the highest honors available in American cinema when it was selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry. Every year, the Library of Congress chooses a small group of films considered culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant enough to protect permanently. Murphy's royal comedy made that exclusive cut, which officially means Prince Akeem's Journey, McDowell's, Soul Glow, and Randy Watson are now part of the country's permanent cultural record, alongside some of the most important films ever made in America. The recognition reflects more than box office success. The film genuinely helped redefine what mainstream black-led comedy could look like commercially, at a time when studios doubted its potential entirely. Its influence stretched well past the jokes themselves, shaping later filmmakers and giving audiences a fictional kingdom that somehow felt completely real and lived in. Being added to the registry places the film in permanent company with movies the government has deemed essential to preserve for future generations. A comedy once nearly retitled into forgettable fantasy fare is now officially recognized as cinematic history. Bonus: the fact almost nobody talks about, the one we teased at the very start. If you blink during the park scene, you'll miss one of the cleverest hidden connections in 80s comedy history. When Prince Akeem hands cash to two homeless men sitting on a park bench, that moment isn't just a random act of royal generosity written in for warmth. Those two men are actually Randolph and Mortimer Duke, the ruthless, wealthy villains from Eddie Murphy's earlier hit Trading Places, played by the very same actors reprising their roles years later. In that earlier film, the Duke brothers lose their entire fortune after a humiliating, self-inflicted stock market scheme designed to ruin someone else's life instead. Here they reappear in tattered clothing, visibly shocked and grateful. As Akeem casually hands them a stack of cash, without a second thought, it functions as an unofficial crossover, quietly suggesting both films exist inside the same shared universe without ever announcing it directly to the audience. Fans who eventually caught the connection were stunned, and what could have been a simple throwaway gag instead became one of the most legendary hidden cameos in comedy film history. It's a tiny detail that rewards only the most attentive rewatchers, tucked into a scene most people assume is purely incidental. A royal bailout for two disgraced millionaires might be the single smartest joke buried anywhere in the entire movie. And those were 20 strange facts about coming to America. Behind every joke, cameo, and improvised line sits a film that quietly reshaped what mainstream comedy could look like, and that legacy still matters more than most casual viewers realize. If you made it this far, leave a like, subscribe, and comment which facts surprised you the most. And don't forget to suggest another movie that deserves a list of strange facts. See you in the next video.